My name is Andrew Mason, and today we'll be discussing the criminal mind of Charles Manson. Charles Manson was born November 12th, 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio, to a single mother who was 16 years old, who was also an alcoholic and a prostitute. Her name was Kathleen Maddox. As Manson got older, he was placed into boys' school at the age of 12 years old, and this is the point in his life where him and his mother began to grow very distant, and she kind of rejected him. The father figure in Manson's life was primarily absent, which had an impact later on. Once out of boys' school, he lived in the streets, surviving through petty crimes. At one point, he moved in with his aunt and uncle in West Virginia. The rest of his early life was kind of about transition and moving in from schools to prisons to reform schools and to various different small-scale crimes. So while he was behind bars, Manson grew very angry and frustrated. He kind of bottled all these emotions up until he was an adult, when he kind of exploded and his real anger was let out. When he was 21 and he was released from prison, he married a waitress and he had a son with her, Charles Manson Jr. Him and his new family moved to Los Angeles using a stolen car, and once he moved out west from Cincinnati, it kind of opened the book for chaos for him. So he was eventually tracked down using the stolen car. He actually got 3 years for taking a stolen car across state lines, and he got a felony out of it. And he got sent to Terminal Island, which is a prison. His wife divorced him while he was in prison. Once he got out of the penitentiary after his 3 years, he took interest into the new hippie lifestyle. He actually had a big passion for music, which is what really drove him into going to Los Angeles in the first place. And he traveled across the coast of California with his guitar and what would become of the Manson family. And this is a group of young people that came to California for a new beginning. They were actually doing the hippie shit too. So they were independent people who wanted a new start. And some of these people didn't come from the best homes either. They kind of took to liking Manson because Manson was able to be a con artist and give them somebody to look up to. And it got to a point where they trusted him so much that they would do whatever he said. And this group became very important in his later crimes. So that brings me to the Tate murders, which is one of his big, well-known crimes. So this happened August 9th, 1969. The Manson family had broken into a Beverly Hills residence. There were 5 perpetrators: Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, Charles Manson, Tex Watson, and Leslie Van Houten. The big target here was Sharon Tate, but there were 4 other people that were killed with her. They were all brutally stabbed throughout the evening. Sharon Tate was 8.5 months pregnant when she was stabbed 16 times by 2 members of the Manson family. The reason for murder still remains a debate and kind of a mystery. Many people believe that it was a senseless act of violence, and others think that it was just Manson being a psycho. So that's Sharon Tate right there, and the 4 others that were killed with her. And when they killed Sharon Tate, they wrote on the wall, "Death to pigs," which I'll get to later. They wrote it with their own blood. So the very next day, on August 10th, the LaBianca murders occurred. And this was in the same area. Leno and Rosemary LaBianca were the victims in this one. They died similar deaths. So the Manson family kind of executed the similar scheme, where they had one person out front, kind of keeping watch, while the other 4 went in and did the business. So Leno was killed with a bayonet. They stabbed him in the neck. And Rosemary was forced to watch, and then she was killed with brutal stabbings with kitchen utensils and knives. So after the killings, they fled to the desert to hide. These are the 2 victims. That's Leno, and that's Rosemary LaBianca. So the deaths, these 2 murders kind of went on as a mystery for a little bit because they didn't have enough evidence nor suspects to prove who did it. And at the same time, the Manson family's hiding out in the Death Valley State Park. And they were arrested for vandalizing state park property. And one of the members, Susan Atkins, kind of gave one of the officers insight about her possible involvement with the killings, which got the rest of them into it. So trials of the crimes began in 1970 in June. All members were sentenced to life in prison for their involvement in the crimes. And that brings me to my criminal theories, which is number one for Manson, his social learning process. This applies to Manson in a few ways. One, he was in the system for so long. I mean, it's all he saw was criminal behavior and bad influences going in and out of these systems. While he was in jail, he was actually abused physically, mentally from guards and inmates. There was a story that Manson was actually raped by one of the inmates, and he was so angry about it, he wanted revenge, so he almost beat his rapist to death, and then he framed it that somebody else had done it instead of Manson doing it. And these kind of behaviors were like normal to him. He learned from these criminals that he was around that this is like how life is. It's cold and it's dark. So he picked up on these traits and kind of like solidified his adult actions. My second theory on Manson was the social structures theory. And, going back to his early life, he just never had it normal. Even as an adult, he never had like a foundation. So he was constantly moved around the country as he was younger, and he never settled at a home life. His home life was actually negative and short-lived because his mom was a prostitute. So he's probably interacting with all these guys she slept with that probably weren't the best of guys to be around. He was always lower class, which is key because the statistic says that lower class kids are more likely to commit crimes than middle class and up. And he was also very angry at the upper class people. As we saw earlier, he wrote "Death to Pigs" on the wall of that well-known actress. And he surrounded himself with people of his stature. He didn't find a good crowd. He was always with lower class people. So I hope you learned a lot about Manson in this presentation, and enjoy your break.